Since we have 15 minutes, I thought I would read out from this book that Rob and I published in 21, and it's called Challenge for NATO Military Strategy in the 21st Century. I will, however, try to relate my comments to the topic, which is liberty, freedom, and ask whether NATO promotes liberty and whether it has the power to do so. So it's a question of virtue and of vertu, as we heard from the earlier speaker. And I think it's a very relevant question when it comes to the Ukraine case, which I will discuss a bit. So the question is, what kind of liberty, what does it mean in practical NATO politics, and what role does NATO play now vis-à-vis major states? And the preamble, you quoted from it, the countries, the member states, this is the 49 Washington Treaty, are determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. So here we have it. This is the whole package, so to speak, perfectly worded. It's all in there. Then in the same treaty, which I tell my students is a good read because it's a very short treaty, hasn't been changed since 49. So it's unlike the EU treaties. It's readable for non-lawyers, as the lawyers often call us. Article 3 is on your own defense obligation. So Sweden and Finland, you have to be good at defending yourself. God helps those who help themselves. Article 4 is on the right of consultation if you feel threatened, your territorial integrity and sovereignty. Sovereignty then, of course, being a key aspect, the key aspect of freedom. So this is what Turkey invokes all the time. It feels threatened by the Kurds and a number of others, not the Russians, presumably. Then the famous Article 5, which really doesn't say one has to rush to the defense of others, but says one will consult in the case of an attack and have this one for all, etc. But who will be the ones defending whom? That is, in a way, a rather open question. Then Article 10, open door policy. And this is the enlargement, sometimes called expansion, not politically correct perhaps, but the enlargement paragraph. And that says that states that can support the principles of the treaty can apply to join. And let's look then a little at how this has been practiced and how this may play out regarding Ukraine. One could say there are two hypotheses then in a broad way. Democracies may join NATO. So it's all about the values. If you're a democracy, you may apply and join NATO if you are in the Euro-Atlantic geographical area. And then we could say Turkey joined in 1952. That was a promising and large Muslim democracy. Eastern Europe joined once they were democratic. Well, they could hardly join before. They were members of the Warsaw Pact. Spain, after Franco, offered to Ukraine and Georgia in 2008, seemed to be a very naive offer based on no calculation of strategic interaction or reaction. So that would seem to validate a democracy thesis that if you're interested and you are at least nominally a democracy, you may apply. But of course, this democracy's joined thesis meets immediately Realpolitik and reality in this kind of American phrasing, the checks that bounce. So the check to Georgia and Ukraine from 2008, they were very generous. There was very little sort of stipulation when it was sort of come and join us as quickly as you want. And this was pushed by Washington, by Bush, to the protestations of the French and Norwegians and others. We were quite skeptical. These were checks that bounced, as we know, because the Russians reacted in Georgia and they later reacted in Ukraine. So if we say the other hypothesis, Realpolitik, decides. NATO is a traditional military alliance. It seeks to expand when the enemy or threat, the presumed threat, Russia, is weak. So it expands in the 1990s, expands in the Balkans, despite the opposition or attempt by the FSB to stall it, North Macedonia, Montenegro, maybe Bosnia. And you saw on the map, it would make good sense to have all of the Balkans as members. There is a strategy behind this. It is not only a plan, an open door policy, but there is a calculation behind it. Is this borne out by the facts? I don't think so. There is, in a way, there was no concerted strategy behind enlargements that I have been able to find. And there was also this sort of partnership policy that was forged after 1990, which doesn't stipulate, doesn't sort of invite a strategic consideration of who can become partners and whether this is a quick way to membership. The partnership policy, we wrote a study in 2011, a book called NATO, The Power of Partnerships, and it could have been the impotence of partnerships. But that may have served, paradoxically, NATO well, because when it comes to Ukraine, we see that indeed there's a partnership. That's NATO's relation with Ukraine for the moment. Nobody can say what exactly a partnership should entail. The partnership with Ukraine was on a low sort of back burner. It wasn't developed very much. I have a daughter who's in a Norwegian NATO delegation. She used to go to Ukraine to have these small projects to keep up the partnership, but nothing that was lethal, nothing that was threatening, nothing that could infuriate Russia. And this, as we know, was the policy regarding Ukraine until the present. It was a sort of, this is not our war, this is a partner country. The sanctions that came in place, they were EU, but they were primarily US-induced sanctions. And here we get to the leadership question. What moves NATO? And this is, of course, sort of a lecture particularly for the Finns and the Swedes, but you know all this already, of course, that look at the leadership in NATO is American. And there was a story of a Norwegian NATO ambassador sitting between the American and the British, and the Belgian ambassador had opinions on everything in NATO and took the floor constantly, whereupon the American leans over in front of the Norwegian speaking to the Brit, and he says, so what do they contribute? So it is a question of power, military willingness, ability, willingness, and strategic interests. And very, very quickly, in the interest of time, NATO leadership, American leadership brought NATO into being the lead actor in Libya, the Libya operation, 2011. The same is true in Afghanistan. We were all in Enduring Freedom, an American-led operation, and NATO needed a role. So here we had ISAF. Then also examples like the sanctions I mentioned and other cases of out-of-area operations. It's basically the US and allies. And we see the same now in terms of NATO's role in Ukraine and strategic leadership. NATO's role is a bit unclear. We have Jens, my compatriot, who is extremely active on the verbal political side. He is sort of talking up the NATO role tremendously. At the same time, he is stating that NATO has no formal part in supplying arms, of course, but this active role of NATO, which, of course, related to the value questions, one must condemn the ad bellum violation of the UN Pact. One must condemn the breaches of the Geneva Conventions. All of that is perfectly within the treaty of NATO and should be. But we see that those that took the lead on what to do now, they were the Americans seconded by the British and then seconded in turn by the Poles, the Baltics, the Nordics. And now we have a coalition of about 40 states, including Sweden, Finland, other non-NATO members. So here we have a very good illustration of how the action that goes on with or without the NATO chapeau with or without the EU chapeau, is really to be found in the major capitals with a military structure or military culture, strategic culture. And I think this is now important for predicting a bit what will happen in the Ukraine case. Let's hope that NATO is not drawn into this inadvertently by a spillover. But I think NATO's role will be emerging, perhaps not as we think. If we just imagine the outcomes to come, what we can predict now from what we know, there is a military prediction of a culmination point, as Clausewitz called it, late August perhaps, where Russia will not be able to fight anymore, won't have the ammunition, won't have the troops, won't have the resources. And as we know from World War II, the Americans won by having the resources, I mean, the ability to produce, to transport, to supply. If we take this view, if we believe this, we will be in a situation of a victor's justice, perhaps, with the situation of Colin Powell's Pottery Barn rule rewritten: when you break it, you own it. When Russia breaks it, we own it. So somebody will have to pay the reconstruction, and if there is a military victory, of course, the victors will not just sort of shake off the dust and go home. They will say, now we will have influence in this area, and what better way of having long-term influence than making Ukraine candidate for membership, quick path, fast track to NATO membership, EU membership. In all events, this will require American security guarantees for Ukraine. The other alternative outcome is a status quo ante, maybe plus something, so that there will be, in a way, a Russian presence in Crimea and Donbas, Luhansk. But also in that case, be it a negotiated or non-negotiated outcome, there will be the same situation for the West. One will have to have a security guarantee. And again, depending on the relative military power in the future between Russia and the West in Ukraine, so to speak, NATO membership will be a likely option, or one could simply have a perennial partnership policy on the part of NATO in Ukraine and just fill it with whatever one wants. And then finally, before time flies, as Ronald Reagan said when he was president, he said, time flies when you're having fun. He said, not when it flies. What will be the counter move by Russia to this? Because now I've outlined two scenarios that we may see from our side, but of course strategy is not a plan, as Mike Tyson underlined. He said, when you're punched in the face, you need a strategy. It's not enough to have a plan. So if Russia then finds it opportune to declare ceasefire in August, say, at some point where the culmination is approaching, one could have then a great relief among Europeans, French, German, Italian, those that are not very keen on going on with the war fighting, with the aid to Ukraine, so to speak. And one could have then perhaps a split among Western allies. So this will be, I think, a very smart way of thinking Clausewitzian logic, that all war is about political outcomes, and that would be very much of the same situation continuing. As one friend said, it will be déjà vu all over again.
You showed us that NATO had a lack of strategy, as you phrased it. Do you think this will be changing when NATO is facing the grim reality of a war in Europe?
There is now a very strong public opinion when one sees, as I think Charlie said, when ordinary people see on TV and in the media how mechanized warfare actually plays out, and in addition the terrible attacks on civilians. It's sort of the full spectrum of war crimes on display all the time. And this has made it impossible to normalize a relationship with this president of Russia, certainly. And what I thought was very unwise by President Biden at an earlier point, where he said that we can't talk with him, he has to leave, he's a war criminal and so on. Don't demonize your opponent when you are colleagues in world politics. Now that is unavoidable. There can't be really this kind of reset again. But I think that from the Russian point of view, it's very wise to make this a long-drawn affair, because the Western media will not be interested in a dull war that is low-key, that doesn't really bring big shocks. Politicians will lose interest, and what then happens in Washington in the longer run. So I've seen many of these sort of extreme interest in Afghanistan, in Libya and so on. Everybody talks about it, and then after a while the interest is gone.
Thank you.
Thank you.